we're going to talk about editing. I'm in the midst of editing a memoir that's been very difficult to write. Some of you may be aware of the precursor to this memoir. Hi, it's Ellen Marie Francisco, and I want to talk about my most recent editing work, which is on my memoir, I Stand Corrected. Tells the story about what was going on in my life right before my arrest in 2013. I spoke about my arrest in my other book, Good Girl's Guide to County Jail for the Bad Girl in Us All, which was published in 2017. It's more of a how to avoid the pitfalls of the criminal justice system. So if you happen to read it, you're going to pick up some good tips on how to not get busted, and if you do get busted, how to manage your own criminal case, and lots of good advice, hard knocks lessons. And I interviewed a lot of women when I was in there, so I got a lot of intel that I wouldn't normally have access to. So, but when I wrote Good Girl's Guide to County Jail, well, I should back up a moment. I wrote both the books, Good Girl's Guide to County Jail for the Bad Girl in Us All, and I Stand Corrected, basically while I was journaling in jail. So I was writing in real time the whole time I was in there, which was 59 days. And when I got out, I had all this material. I was completely incensed at what was going on in the community and how they were locking up innocent people, but don't get me started there. Anyway, so I knew that I had to get this book out. What I didn't realize is that although I wrote it basically in jail, I still didn't, it wasn't finished. It was pencil writing on lined paper. I had to move it obviously into a digital format. I needed to work with it from there. But what was interesting is that because I'd been so traumatized before I went to jail, and then of course that experience was pretty traumatizing in itself, there was a lot that I was just forgetting to put into the memoir. So when I started to fill it in, and when I started to add some of the precursors to, what was going on in my life so it would set the scene, I found that that wasn't hard to do at all. I remembered that I Stand Corrected as a book that I've worked on and then had to put down and come back to and work on and come back to, and part of just the normal writing process. You do need to let your work fester, so it gives you some distance while you let these books sit, and then comes the time when you've got to get back into them and you've got to be serious, and then you're getting the work done. So here I was reading what I thought was going to be one of the final versions of my manuscript, and I just started doing this a number of weeks ago. I decided to do my final copy edit before I sent it to my editor for the copy edit, because I wanted to catch as much as I could. I wanted to make it as easy a job for her as possible. And I also know that once you get to a certain point in the production process of a book, at some point you're not doing anything to it anymore, and it's just going forward in the process. So you don't have a lot of time to go back and fix things if they're wrong, or if suddenly you've noticed something. So I like to go over and over my books. And my process is usually to start from the beginning and just read all the way through. So I'll limit whatever distractions I have in my own inner world and outside world while that process is happening, so that it doesn't break my focus and it doesn't break my momentum. Here I was thinking that I was going to be doing this very simple copy edit, like paragraph structure or sentence structure and whatever else, and eliminating some redundant descriptions. It's normal in a copy edit to do those things, to just sort of do the cleanup sweep through it all. And what I found was that I had written enough of it that enough of the picture was painted in this memoir. And gosh, you know, as soon as I started reading it, it was like enough of it was in motion, enough of it was set already, so that when I started reading it, because so much of it was right, once I got into that zone to read it again and I became entrenched in that environment as you're reading, I realized that there were things that I was remembering that weren't in the book, that suddenly I needed to address. Maybe I needed a little bit more of a, not exactly a content edit, but I definitely needed to look at adding more content, because I definitely couldn't leave these new remembrances out. And this is the fascinating thing about trauma. I mean, I've lived with trauma for a good part of my adult life now, and it's a very mystical experience to have, you know, things that you experienced suddenly not be remembered and available through whatever reason. It's just so much of this wasn't available to me. So here I am thinking I'm just about done this thing, and I can, you know, move it off into the next phase of its production plan. And now I've got to go back and add new content. And now we've already pretty much signed off on the structure is what it is as far as the story, because you know, I mean, we talk a little bit about what was going on in my life before this event happened, and then the event happens, and then it unfolds in the way it does, and then I'm out of jail, and then I write a little bit about what it was like to integrate back into the community. And wow, talk about packing a punch. It definitely was more than I bargained for. So you have this debate on, well, do you want to finish the project and just push it through? And just I mean, my editor wouldn't know that there was anything missing. The average reader wouldn't know that anything was missing. But now I knew that there were whole characters that hadn't gotten in there, and they were integral to certain aspects of the story as well. And there were certain situations that I completely blanked on. So anyway, so here I am, I'm writing these extra scenes. It's a little more than I bargained for. I didn't, you know, it was a really hard book to write over the years anyway, because every time I sat down to write it, I would want to throw up practically, you know, and it was really hard to engage in for long periods of time because of the trauma and a lot of the own, you know, my own emotional realities as a result. So, you know, so here I am thinking this is going to be a quick little push it through in a few days and get on to the next step. And here it's, wow, now we've got to revisit all the content to make sure it all feeds properly through the storyline. So that's where I am right now. I've gone through the first round. You know, there's some technical issues that I had to deal with as well with I Stand Corrected, because originally when I wrote the portions that I was writing in jail, I was writing in present tense because it was happening to me. It was journal entries basically, right? So I'm writing in present tense. I'm not really thinking about you know, what I need to do for the book. I just need to get the material out. So thank God I wrote pretty much every day that I was in there, because there was, first of all, no way that I would have been able to remember half of what had happened to me had I not written daily, because even now, sometimes I read through it and I go, wow, like, I don't remember it happening, but I wrote about it, so it had to have happened. So it's been a very strange experience in reclaiming some of my lost memories. So I had to go back into the work, right? Like, I couldn't, in good conscience, just push the work through and not add this content. I felt like it wasn't telling the whole story. Like there's no point in me writing this story if I'm not telling it all, right? So that's part of the pain in doing this as well, is there's a lot that I'm writing about that, you know, a lot of people that know me really well had no idea about, right? Like I was really good at suffering in silence in some regards, and prior to the experience where I was arrested for something that I didn't do, but I did sort of do. So yeah, so it's been a little more challenging than I thought it was going to be. It's a little more exciting because I feel like, as much as it's hard to reclaim these memories, I'm kind of glad that my psyche is giving them up, you know, is releasing them, because it's probably going to help further in some of the healing that I've had to do, obviously, that's been required to do through this experience. And now, I mean, we're talking about, this is something that happened in 2013. You'd think, like, wow, 8 years later, it would be easier, but there's still quite a sense of foreboding even getting into the project. But I am proud of it at this point, because it's I mean, it does read pretty well. It's got a pretty good pace going. So, of course, I need to keep that in mind as I'm going back in to do anything, because we, you know, we pretty much got it where it needs to be. So I don't want to overwrite and ruin, you know, ruin the flow or ruin the pacing of it. I wanted to share with you samples of that. So, you know, you can check the comments down below and see what's there. Okay, so now, like, I'm on a deadline. I'm putting myself on a deadline. I really want to publish this. So I got to get on with it. But before I do anything else to it, I am going through the entire manuscript now that I've added all this extra content, making sure that everyone's named properly, because there were times when I would be journaling and I would just be calling somebody a deputy or a girl or a whatever, you know, and then further on in the journal entries, that person actually has a name and is now, you know, a more defined character. So the other thing that I decided to do was to mix the tenses in the book, which is perhaps, you know, literary annihilation of some sorts. But I'm talking about, you know, a very specific set of circumstances. I'm talking about life behind bars for a short period of time. So time is different when you're in jail. Like, it's, you know, you don't have clocks, you don't have watches, you don't have any way of knowing whether you've got the right date or not. In fact, thank God I wrote, because I wouldn't have been able to tell a Tuesday from a Wednesday, you know, but I was able to, as I went along, keep track of what day was day. And of course, you know, Tuesday follows Monday, so as long as I knew where Sunday and Monday were, I could find my way to Tuesday and Wednesday. So, you know, but yeah, time stands so still in there, and you have no real access to your outside world. So when I was writing it, I was writing in past tense when I was talking about the things that had happened before jail, and then I was writing in present tense when I actually get into jail. So you can literally feel the difference in even how I use language in the book to describe that. And then once I get out of jail, I'm back to describing it as, you know, something in hindsight, or in the back, in the rear view mirror instead of in front of me. Is it a device that works? We'll see once my editor gets hold of it, right? Like, if it doesn't fly with her, it's not going to fly with the public. It was 62,000 words. I think I must have written an extra 7,000 words with everything that I needed to get in there that just happened to be coming back. So here we are, like I said, 8 years later, and at some point I need to stop. It's a lot different than writing fiction, because I mean, at least with fiction, you can make up the characters, you can make them do whatever you need them to do. And in some ways, the story will write itself once you get to a certain momentum. I think most writers would agree with that. It just kind of, the story takes over rather than you having to pull it out of you. But in this case, it was all so real, and these events happened to me. And, you know, even the comparison between my work as a fiction writer and now as doing this piece of memoir, totally different. I mean, just completely not the kind of story that I would have written if I were writing fiction. I mean, right? Like my first fiction that's been released is Catastrophic Expectations, Sex, Love, and the Pursuit of Marriage, and that's completely different than, you know, I Stand Corrected or Good Girl's Guide to County Jail for the Bad Girl in Us All. So a completely different focus, a completely different set of circumstances, and a completely different use of, you know, structure and devices, writing devices. So I'll be really glad when I can get this book off my plate once and for all, because, you know, there were years that I couldn't even touch it, honestly. Not to say that I wasn't writing or doing other things, but it just, I would come back to it. I just couldn't stay with it for long. So I was lucky if I could get, you know, a read through in before I just couldn't do it anymore. So I'm finding that, you know, that there is, because of the trauma, a little bit of a backlash as far as how I need to take care of myself during this process, because I can keep things really simple, and it's a good place to start from. But it does affect, you know, what I eat and how I eat and what I drink, and, you know, and how easily I'm distracted, and the degree to which I can focus. I mean, when you start to have, it's one thing, you know, like I can be a taskmaster. I can sit down for hours, no problem, and just churn it out without a break, no problem. But it's amazing to see what distractions I need when I sit down to do this. I mean, you know, I'll have it all ready to go, and then I've got to get up and, you know, like clean the entire bathroom or put all the dishes in the sink or do whatever, you know. So writing memoir is hard, you know. It's not, I mean, unless you're writing memoir about something that's really exciting and, you know, like your climb to the top and the fact that it didn't hurt to get there, that's a great memoir. Like, everybody wants to read that. This is a memoir about some of the darkest periods of my life and some of the definitely most dangerous and threatening and confusing. You know, like I got into jail 8 months after a traumatic brain injury, when I still was pretty destabilized as far as how my memory was working and what I could rely on. So and I was diagnosed with post-concussive syndrome, so I was like, I could go from zero to bitch in less than 2 seconds, you know, because my brain was so, I don't know, it didn't, I mean, you know, there are days when any of us could get there. I didn't need, you know, you wouldn't need the head injury for it, but, you know, in my case, it took not a lot for me to get really annoyed. And what was going on at the same time, which it took me years to figure out, was, you know, I was already psychic, but I really had a psychic explosion after the head injury. I didn't realize right away, though, you know, like I knew, however, that the day that I got arrested, you know, my car had been towed. I knew that that was an illegal tow. I knew that I was being scammed. I knew that I was being taken advantage of. I could see it. I could see it. I didn't need to know anything to see right through that situation and the energetics of it. And as it turned out, you know, it took about 3 years later for me to hear in the community that the tow company had been running illegal kind of scamming operations and that they had been investigated for it. So you know, I was running around like a crazy person, you know, screaming about that, you know, obvious fact to me at the time, but nobody was doing anything about it. Instead, I was the one with the handcuffs, you know. So it's, you know, you start to get this combination of a little bit of trauma, a little bit of psychic ability, you know, some tough situations to navigate through, and a little bit of, you know, self-righteous entitlement. And you got the contents of a good story that's really hard to tell. So for what it is, it's what it is, you know, and I hope that the people who find this book are those that might be in precarious situations in their lives without really realizing it, because sometimes, you know, you're just on autopilot. It doesn't matter what you're doing, you're just going to keep moving forward, and a lot of times you don't see that there are choices, or there may be ways that you can amend your behavior or do things that might help you in the long run rather than hurt you in the short term and long run. So, you know, hindsight is 2020 for the most part. Thanks for listening to me talk about this project. It's been difficult, and I think that a lot of women need to read this, because I think, I mean, because it does have undertones of domestic violence and relationships that go bad because of drugs and alcohol, and, you know, behaviors that a lot of people regret, you know, come out in these situations. It's, hopefully people will find it to be a bit of a beacon of light, and it's definitely going to be an interesting read, no joke. I mean, it's just ridiculously, like, I couldn't write a fiction book like this, you know, if I tried at this point. I mean, maybe, I guess I could, right? I'm going to keep trying. We're going to keep writing. There are other novels under my belt that I can fix and get out there. So, stranger than fiction is a really viable expression for a lot of reasons. It's just, like, even with my psychic ability and the prophetic dream that I had before I got arrested, pretending that I might get arrested, I mean, none of it was that easy to see at the time. So, and it's taken years to process, like, how messed up my life was before it and during it and even after it, as you know, during my efforts to stabilize after a head injury and post-traumatic stress disorder and conversion and other things that were going on with me as a result of my injury, which was an assault, by the way, right? Like, it wasn't even, oh my God. I mean, to think that, you know, I could have been really permanently hurt. It was a narrow escape, you know, when you get something heavy objects hitting you in the temple. Yeah, it's a hard blow. It's a hard blow to accept. Not only the hit, but the reason that it happened and the person that made it happen. You know, like, none of that's easy to accept. So, and then, you know, it's normal to feel the discourse from that, or the shame, or the regret, or, you know, the helplessness and the hopelessness that might come from that kind of torment. So, yeah, I would never have believed that I could have been a victim of domestic violence, honestly, because I was such a badass in my own right. Like, I would never let anybody take advantage of me, man. If, like, I was nice, until you crossed me. And then I, hell to pay. You did not want to be around me. So I knew how to go to task if I needed to. It wasn't like I was going to go beat people up, but I was definitely going to defend myself, But it just didn't even have the opportunity to, and didn't even have the possibility of helping myself in that situation. Like, it just happened so fast and was so out of control so quickly that and that's the thing where I feel bad for women, because even women in jail I met that had been had been victims of domestic violence, so they had to deal with that in their own ways too. It's a hard thing to come out of. It definitely takes a toll, and your self-esteem takes a hit, and of course it affects your trust of mankind, right? Because you have these visceral experiences that change your life. So there's some memory to go with that, right? It's quickly as the body and the mind will help you forget the terrible things that have happened to you, so will they help you remember when you least expect it, or at least, are up for it, So if you are writing memoir and you're writing it based on a traumatic event that happened to you, then definitely use the work as the cathartic tool that it can be. There is really a lot to be said for being willing to write that story over and over and over again, because you write it on paper once, you get it out of you, but if you're thinking about publishing it, you just have to keep revisiting it over and over again until it's absolutely perfectly right and it makes sense, and it's delivered in a way that's going to keep the page turning. So has it helped me heal? Because you think, wow, having to digest this material over and over again and face it over and over again and face the mistakes that I made, the mistakes that I made that, I might still be making years later, this is the thing. It's change takes time, right? Like, you've got some patterning and you've got some things that are dug into you real deep, and trauma can make them dig deeper rather than loosen off, so you have to be willing to meet it where you are. And so yeah, I ate way more sugar in the last 2 weeks than I would normally. I drank, I'm not even much of an alcohol drinker, and I had a few drinks just to make sure, not to mention, whatever might be around to help soften the blow. So, or to help, work with some of the emotions that come up. But yeah, so the coping mechanisms that I've been relying on to get through this are maybe not the healthiest. But when you're not in a healthy space, it's hard to do healthy things. So I'm just going with it in a very tender, loving way, and just letting some of my external things fall off while I go through it's like deep inner therapy, constantly having to work on this, and generally taking more accountability for things overall. That's never fun, maybe if you're a glutton for that kind of stuff, but I hope as well that if you're writing memoir and it's based on something traumatic, that you go easy on yourself, and that if you're looking for traditional ways to publish and you're trying to get an agent and you're getting an agent, and then they're pushing you to finish the material or do edits on the material or do whatever, you know, bear that in mind, right? Like, you don't want to have to go back into the work if you're not prepared to. So you, before you turn it over to other people, you really want to be in a place where, you know, you've dug deep enough to be able to face doing more work on it. So as much as I would love to just hurry this out the door and move it on to the next person who's going to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, I can't hand it over until I'm done. So, and that's where, you know, having a self-publishing plan might be a little less boxed in feeling, because you're not worrying about somebody breathing down your throat. Let's get this in, you're on a deadline, right? You can actually move your own deadline around accordingly, which I'm obviously going to have to do if I go ahead with self-publishing this. I have to protect the guilty and the innocent in this regard, so a lot of the names are going to change, and there's so many characters in this book already, like, it's mind-blowing. There's just over 100, and I'm barely at 120 pages of my edit, so my read-through, my clean-up phase. Yeah, so memoir. Oh, if there's a happy memoir to write, I'm gonna hopefully have one of those at some point. But in the meantime, it's the trauma drama and, you know, the slips and falls. Maybe it'll help somebody in their slip and fall. Maybe there won't be a fall. Maybe there'll just be a slip. And if I can write a book that affects people in a way that alters the course of their life, so that I save them a whole lot of hassle and time and incarcerations and whatever else might be lurking there in the background, then yeah, then I need to, right? Like, it's why we do it. It's why the material just keeps coming out, because it has to. And so, yeah, I'm getting excited to be at least closer than I've ever been to putting this one out there. So thanks for watching, and I really appreciate your listening, and I hope that if you're writing that you feel motivated to get on with it, but also to keep it in perspective and to keep a balance. I'm finding that I have very manic tendencies when it comes to writing. It's either all in or not at all. So, you know, finding the balance of being able to just stick with it to a certain degree every day is what I've been working on for the last year, and I'm making definitely some good progress, and makes it easier to get through the day, and to also to step away when it gets a little hard, because I know that I've still got enough pages under my belt, or enough words turning themselves in. So yeah, like, keep working yourself, and if I can do anything to help motivate you, I'll certainly try. And if it's a hard story, then, you know, don't be afraid to get the psychological or psychiatric help that you might need to tell it. Like, don't underestimate the power of trauma to wreak havoc on your day and your mind and your emotional space, and, you know, your ability to function as a normal human being. I mean, you know, suffering is difficult. So pat yourself on the back for even being able to, you know, be brave enough to face it. It's hard stuff to face. And you know, and if you're not a writer, but you've had trauma, and you know, and you're having a difficult time functioning, you know, it might help you to write it down over and over again and just keep getting it out of you and keep getting it out of you. Because I can tell you, over the course of the years that I've been writing this, that, you know, this calendar year was the first year that I could actually read it and delve into it without such severe symptoms of nausea or headaches or whatever else, you know, just latent, dormant anxiety. So it does get easier, you know, the more you visit it and the more you work it out and the more it you know, the more you solve the problems in the actual memoir book portion. You know, you eventually work it all out. So hang in there if you're doing it, and let me know what you're working on. Like, if you were going to write a memoir, what would your memoir be on? Like, what would you... A lot of times, you know, memoirs are written as well because you've gained some very specific experience that you could never have gained without this horrible situation happening, or this, you know, traumatic event taking place. So and so a lot of times it is, you know, passing the hat a little bit in knowledge and trying to save people a lot of pain. So good luck if you're writing, and yeah, and we'll see you next time. I'll give you a little update when I get to my next phase. So thanks again. It's nice to see you here. Bye. Precursor to my memoir, I Stand Corrected, is this book, Good Girl's Guide to County Jail for the Bad Girl in Us All. So I wrote this first years ago, came out in 2017. A guide for people who might be a little bit on the edge of that lifestyle, where it's a little enticing, where they might have reached certain levels of desperation in their own lives, where you know, a life of crime might actually be part of their day-to-day life. So this guide book is a huge asset to anyone who may be entrapped in the legal system and have to figure out how to get themselves out. So anybody reading this book before they went to jail would probably amend some of their own behavior to make sure they didn't get there, and if they did, if it was a, you know, maybe a very short stay. In my case, I wasn't luckily guilty of what I was charged with, and luckily in my case there was surveillance video that was used first to arrest me and then to release me. This is Ella Marie Francisco. Thanks for coming into my channel today.